Yeah, all this is being recorded now.
Hey, Coach, this is Justin. I was just making sure I gave somebody the right apartment complex number. They're going to call and inquire about apartments and shit.
Yeah, all of this is being put on tape now.
And then
See,
put in an archive.
that's
I hope.
right.
I hope. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we'll do is that when we get the tape from the end of the day, I'll cut this out, and then we'll have the show. But we'll also have about 8 or 10 minutes of
I see.
us doing nothing but being on television.
Yeah.
Yeah, God is good. Contemporary Black Lives Matter movement.
That's right.
Yes,
That's
good.
right. That's right.
10 seconds.
Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, Dr. Lewis Baldwin. Dr. Baldwin has been with us on a number of occasions, and I'm almost certain that he needs absolutely no introduction to our audience, Dr.
Thank
Baldwin.
you.
I think
Thank
that, as we've said on many occasions, you've been with us almost since the very, very beginning.
That's right. That's
And we
right.
certainly can appreciate what you've already given to us.
Thank
but
you.
we're also looking forward to what you have to give today.
I appreciate
especially when we talk about the Black Lives Movement. And before we get into what you have called, Dr. Baldwin, the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, let's talk about Lewis Baldwin, to have you to give us some information about your background, your education, and some of your experiences. And then by the beginning of the second segment, then we'll have an opportunity to get into an introduction to the so-called Black Lives Matter movement. Let's do it from that perspective.
Well, I'm a native of Camden, Alabama. I grew up there in Wilcox County, Alabama, which was called at that time the Alabama Black Belt. I attended schools in Wilcox County. I graduated from Camden Academy High School in 1967. And from that point, I matriculated at Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama, majored in history. 1971, I graduated with a BA degree in history. And from that point to Crozer Theological Seminary in Rochester, New York, where I received the MA and MDiv degrees. From that point, of course, to Northwestern University, where I received the PhD degree in 1980 in American Christianity. And from that point, of course, I've been involved in scholarship and teaching. I taught at Worcester College in Ohio, Colgate University in New York, and for 30 years, I taught at Vanderbilt University here in Nashville.
And so, and also known, Dr. Baldwin, I must say, as one of the most important individuals dealing with the scholarship of Dr. Martin Luther King. Even though today we're not going to talk specifically about Dr. Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about a movement that I didn't know that much about personally before we talked about it.
That was inspired by
that was in a real sense inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King.
Exactly,
Let's see if we can, Dr. Baldwin, during this first few minutes during this segment, to have you to give us some understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement actually started in 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the murder of Trayvon Martin. 3 black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Oprah Tometi, decided that they would get together and start a movement that would deal with the intentional and systematic killing of young black men. And they said, well, hey, this is about black lives. So what we want to do is to go on social media and to sort of promote this idea that black men are being systematically and intentionally killed, not only by vigilantes, but also by police. So the movement started in 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. It blossomed in 2014 with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And since that time, of course, the movement has continued with the killing of Eric Garner, with the killing of Walter Scott in South Carolina, with the killing of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. So the Black Lives Matter movement is not only a slogan, it started out as a slogan. Some might say that it was a rallying cry, that it was a social media hashtag, but now it has become a movement with chapters in 23 chapters in the United States, Canada, and Ghana. And of course, since 2013, there have been more than 700 demonstrations in connection with that movement.
But you also, Dr. Baldwin, I think, can trace that movement, as I think you explained to me, way back into the civil rights movement, to the early parts of the civil rights movement. And so although it only started in 2013 in terms of being what you consider to be the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, but you can also, it also has a history that started long before this.
I think Black Lives Matter has always been a theme in the black freedom struggle. If you go back to the antebellum period with Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, they were all echoing this theme.
Okay, Dr. Baldwin, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take this first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up on the history of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay.
And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. We're still dealing.
And then the last, where are we going from here?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, so would you, do you want to do some history about it? Because I think you were talking about.
Yeah, we want to go into the historical background of it.
Well, let's give about we've got to have about 8 minutes.
Better to talk about that.
Yeah, and then that last 10 minutes we can get into whatever else you wish to deal with.
That sounds great to me, yeah. This is fun.
Yeah, it's all laid out here. And see, this is some important pieces of tape that we're getting right here. Not only does it deal with the subject here.
Yeah, how do you put it in a larger context?
In a context, yeah, that's right.
Because I don't think a lot of people do that. Yeah, a lot of people do that.
What minute, Dr. Haynes?
Yeah, so we're getting ready for the second segment. And it goes like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It goes just like that. And this is one of five, my first of five today.
Yeah.
So we'll be out of here about 2:30. Oprah does one a day, and I do five.
You do 5 a day. You got other
30
people.
seconds, Dr. Haynes.
Yeah, we got 5 more people to come in and occupy that seat.
Oh, man. Doc, you a busy man.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Louis Baldwin, and he's given us some information relative to the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, I think that when we left, we promised that we would give you an opportunity to talk about the historical significance of the Black Lives Matter movement and how it started. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Yes, I think we have to understand that although the movement started in 2013, after the murder of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of George Zimmerman, we have to see that movement in a larger historical context. Black Lives Matter actually started in the pre-Civil War years. If you look at the speeches, the activities of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, they were all echoing this theme, Black Lives Matter, in the late 19th century. John E. Bruce, Henry McNeil Turner, others were speaking to this same theme, Black Lives Matter, early 20th century. Ida B. Wells in her her crusade against lynchings. We're talking about black lives and how they matter and how black bodies should be preserved. And so and in the 1950s and 60s, you get Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. talking about the sacredness of human personality and black lives. So what you have with the Black Lives Matter movement today is a movement that represents, I think, a continuation of centuries of freedom struggle. It's a part of that unbroken tradition of black struggle. And so we have to understand it, I think, in that larger historical context, although the movement started in 2013. It's a part
That
of
is the idea, and that's why you call it the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, because it's really a continuation in a real sense, but it's now contemporary.
Yeah, it's contemporary. It's both contemporary and a continuation of this long history of struggle. And so we have to see it in those terms.
And all those individuals who were concerned about any deprivation against the black population, especially the male. Is there something that is peculiar, Dr. Baldwin, when we talk about this movement dealing with young African-American males? Why is it, where does a male fit into these movements?
I think it's really about vigilanteism. We know that Trayvon Martin was killed by a vigilante, and the movement started with an emphasis on that. But in time, it blossomed to include this idea of police misconduct and police brutality, which occurred, of course, in the case of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And later with Eric Garner in New York, with Jordan Davis, of course, you had vigilanteism in Florida with Jordan Davis. And of course, you had others like Walter Scott in South Carolina, who was killed by a policeman, and Freddie Gray in Baltimore. So the movement is really focused on the killing of young black men, the intentional and systematic maiming and destruction of young black male lives. And interestingly enough, you have black women who are spearheading this movement. So that's what it's all about.
And when you look at this movement, Dr. Baldwin, and you think about the institution of slavery, I think you already mentioned that as part of the framework of the movement. When you look at this movement, it appears to me that the emphasis is on young African-American males, primarily because those are the most dangerous individuals dealing with the institution of slavery. That is, if slavery is to be overthrown, it is not the African-American female, nor the African-American older person, but it will be who? Those young African-American males. And so that's the group.
That's right. That group has always been vulnerable. It was vulnerable in the pre-Civil War years, the antebellum period, as we call it, vulnerable in the late 19th century, earlier 20th century, the civil rights movement, and even today. The systematic and intentional killing and maiming, destruction of young black men, I think, is the issue here with the Black Lives Matter movement. Not to negate the fact that black women are also victims. I think there are statistics that show that every 48 hours, some young black male, female, or child become the victim of what? Vigilante violence or police violence. So it's a movement about the sacredness of black life, about the value, the dignity of human life and black life more specifically. So it's not only about black males, but it is about black males. It's about black people and their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And I think that also, Dr. Baldwin, I'm reminded that there's such a real problem in terms of the economic situation of young African American males. I think that when you look at the statistics for today, you find that they represent a large element of the population whose unemployment is greater than any other area. And so not only is it the killing of African American males, but it also has an aspect in terms of their economic deprivation and their social deprivation and et cetera.
That's an excellent question. And we often forget that when we go on social media and we check out the Black Lives Matter movement, we think it's only about racial profiling and police brutality and misconduct. It's also about poverty and economic injustice. They're very much concerned, Alicia Garza and others who are heading this movement are concerned about poverty and economic injustice, about teenage pregnancy, about incarceration rates in the black community. So it's a movement about the sacredness of black life, that black people must be concerned about black lives, that they must consider black lives sacred, and that the larger society and culture should also embrace this idea of the sacredness, the dignity and worth of black human personality. That's what it's about.
Very good. And so however you look at it, whether we're talking about the immediate destruction of a black life, or whether we're talking about a slow destruction of black life through the inability for most individuals to get work and create a situation where they are always at one another's throats and et cetera, et cetera. That's all part of it. The treatment, all a part of it, in a real sense, of the young African American male.
Yes. It's not only about police brutality and racial profiling, it's about what happens internally in the black community, is that black people themselves must respect the sacredness of black life, which means, hey, we have to deal with black on black crime, as well as police brutality and misconduct, as well as vigilantism, which results in the deaths of black males. We must deal with all of these issues.
And of course, Dr. Ball, we're going to take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
All right.
So,
all right.
Yes. Black Lives Matter. And now you want to know, where do we go from here?
Where are we going from here? Is the movement going to sustain itself, or is it just a fad?
Well, it looks like it has already sustained itself from the very, very beginning.
Worldwide media attention.
Yeah, from slavery. It's just wider. You see, I think
Black bodies are important, I think. And as long as there's police brutality, the movement would exist.
Yeah, you talk about police brutality and whatever, and then you think about Willie Lynch.
Yeah.
You know, that's,
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of stuff out on the internet dealing with Willie Lynch.
Oh, you
I got
do?
the whole Willie Lynch letter, man. You'd be surprised if you ever go out there and see that, man. I got the whole...
I got to check that out.
Yes, sir. Life and Times of Willie Lynch.
Okay.
Yes, about almost 18 hours of it.
Isn't that
Yes. I'm surprised how they kept it out there, but you know.
Okay.
That's from RDockery, I think.
Who is that?
That's RDockery, my second guess. Reuben Dockery.
Okay.
You might know him, I think.
I think I know him, yeah.
He's going to talk about some. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Louis Baldwin, and he's giving us some information in reference to the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement And he's also given us information in reference to the historical aspect of that movement. So, Dr. Baldwin, let's, during this last segment, pick up and give you an opportunity to try to bring in as much information as you possibly can during this last segment to highlight what we're talking about here, dealing with the so-called Black Lives Matter movement, the contemporary version of that movement.
I think we have to consider the question of where that movement goes from here. I think it is an extension of the civil rights movement, because if you look at the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and Ella Baker, John Lewis, they all raised the question of the preservation, the value of black bodies. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is building on that, and I think it's going to continue to be a major movement because it has attracted worldwide media. It's a movement that, as I said earlier, is respected around the world. There are 23 chapters, one in Canada, there's one in Ghana. So I think the movement will continue to blossom and evolve because there will be...
the issues are always the same, no matter where you go. It's always a deprivation of young African-American males.
African-American
so
lives.
I guess, wherever.
Every 48 hours, there's some black male, woman, or child murdered by vigilantes, by hate groups, or by policemen. So that movement, I think, will blossom. And I think because of social media, because of the internet, it will become as important, this is my prediction, as the civil rights movement. When you talk about 700 demonstrations that have occurred since 2013 up to this point in connection with the Black Lives Matter movement, you're talking about a major movement. So we need to move away from this idea that the Black Lives Matter movement is a slogan, that it is a rallying cry, to develop a sense of it as a movement. And as long as black lives are in jeopardy because of poverty, because of racism, because of economic injustice, you're going to have a Black Lives Matter movement. It's a historical movement with an unbroken tradition, and I think we have to keep that in mind.
And it's still dealing with the same basic question in reference to the subjects.
Exactly.
In reference to this movement. No matter where you look,
exactly,
as you've already explained in American history, you're going to find out the same problems, the same deprivation, the same lynchings, the same burnings, and all of those things that happen. And so, yes.
Throughout our history. And Malcolm and Martin spoke boldly to this issue of police brutality. So when we hear people like Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors and Oprah Tometi, who are the leaders of this Black Lives movement, they are simply echoing what Martin and Malcolm and Ella Baker and Rosa Parks and others were saying about the sacredness of black bodies and the need to protect black bodies, not only against police brutality, but against these other problems that you raise, such as poverty and economic injustice.
Yes, because if Black Lives Matter dealing with police brutality, they also matter dealing with the inability of African American males to find jobs, the inability of them to find health. And so it covers the whole thing.
Yes, it spills over into drug addiction, it spills over into teenage pregnancy and other problems that have sort of become prominent in the black community. It's all about the vulnerability of black life. Whether you're talking about economic issues or social issues or cultural issues, the question is, how do we preserve the sacredness, the dignity and worth of black life?
And through all this period, Dr. Baldwin, from the very, very beginning, from slavery on up until now, we're still dealing with the same basic subjects.
Exactly.
And no matter whether you find them in slavery, or whether you find them in modern urban America, they're the same young men between about 16 and 25 or 30 years old that are receiving the attention of this movement in a real sense. And so
it's a problem that is epidemic in our society, and if we don't deal with it, we're going to suffer tragic consequences, and we're already suffering tragic consequences.
And I just want to let you know, Dr. Baldwin, you're doing a great work in terms of making us realize the importance of this movement, because I've seen it on television and I've seen people with signs saying Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And even though I've been involved in this activity for the longest, I've never thought in terms of this being a part of something that was traditional. I've always known of protests, the NAACP and all other organizations that have protested, anti-lynching movements, and I think you've mentioned all of those, but I never was able to put it together as you are able to put it together here, and to indicate that this is indeed not a recent movement, even though you talk about the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, that it's contemporary only because it is now which contemporary is, but it also has its historical roots in something that's very, very important.
Yeah, it's a part of an ongoing struggle.
And I certainly appreciate you, as I think we're getting ready for our final words for today, and I certainly appreciate you bringing us by that information and to encourage us, to let us know that there is an historical foundation, and those who might wish to become involved in this movement can continue to become so involved.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of wondering about where we are now. Is this it?
You had 4 minutes left.
Oh, good. Good. I didn't know. I think
Well, then I think what we have to do is, if you're interested in the Black Lives Matter movement, you have to become a part of social media, and not only social media, but a part of a movement, because the killing of black men, women, and children will continue. That's not going to stop. As I said earlier, that every 28 hours, according to some statistics, some black woman, male, child killed by vigilante police or hate groups. And we know about the Klan and the neo-Nazis and the Aryan nations and paramilitary groups, all of which promote a kind of racist theology, a racist philosophy. So the Black Lives Matter movement, in my view, will continue to grow and will continue to thrive, because you have the foundation for that kind of thing. Yeah.
And so in a real sense, the whole movement is not only a continuation, but more people can become involved in such a movement, and it's and it's a greater recognition of what is going on in reference to the African American
community,
within the African American community.
Now, I think we have to go back to this principle of the sacredness of black life, which is not only embodied in Scripture, but in our Constitution. We all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we really believe in the sacredness, the dignity, and worth of human life, then we will become a part of this Black Lives Matter movement. Because this is what it's all about. It's not only about protecting the sacredness and the dignity of black life, it's about protecting the sacredness and dignity of life in general.
That's exactly it. And so it's much greater than black people. It's how we treat one another.
Each other. And if we're a country that claims to be a Christian nation, that claims to be wedded to the principles of the Constitution, then we'll take that seriously.
And so in a real sense, this is part of what you might call the civil rights movement, because civil rights...
I think it's an extension of the civil rights movement, because as I said earlier, when you look at the civil rights leaders in the 50s and 60s, they were dealing with police brutality, police misconduct. Malcolm X spoke
Black Panthers Party,
to Black Panther Party, King, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer. All of these leaders were concerned about police brutality and the intrusion of Klan elements into the police department. So I think we have to consider that in the larger context of what we are talking about.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let me thank you for coming by and giving us that excellent information. And let me also encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. 30 seconds. That's what I'm saying.
That is 3-0.
Is that what we're doing?
That's 3. That's 2. That's 1.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, when
That's how we've been doing it the other day.
It sounds like you and this gentleman have a special relationship.
we do.
I'm saying we've been doing it.
Man, directed me all this time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
But see, when I look up and I see him over there not looking at me, then I don't know where I am.
I ain't got nothing to tell you.
Okay. Okay, Brother Doctor, how you doing today?
I'm pretty good,
Good.
pretty good.
Now, what we want to do now we can't do this as a
Understood,
kind of thing.
understood.
As a matter of fact, it might be better if you just take that.
My button off, you would like for me to take the button off? Okay.
Because the other folks, when they see this, they'll have a chance to come and say that.
We want equal time.
Now, you understand what I'm
Yes, FCC requires that.
Yeah, you understand
Okay,
what I'm saying?
that's
what
all
I
right.
wanna do, but we can still do whatever, everything we want to do.
I'll follow your lead.
You see?
I'll follow your lead.
No, see, you got the information.
Okay,
Yeah, just stick it in your pocket.
okay, that's fine.
Right here.
Okay.
And okay, Brother Doctor, we've had you on many occasions on this show here.
Correct.
And so what we want to do today is to talk about 3 areas. What I want to talk, would you feel comfortable in talking about political participation of African Americans?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, that's what I
Absolutely.
want to talk about, political participation of African
We can do that.
But we don't want to mention anything that would indicate that you're involved in the political process.
Okay.
Whatever, because we get that thing about equal time from those in the
I'll answer your questions.
yeah. No, what I want you to do is to African American political participation
Okay.
and to talk about some of your experiences in terms of running for office. You see? But how
30
black
seconds
folks
until we
participate
start
in
first segment.
black folks participate in the political
Okay.
process and et cetera. So I'm going to have to use the first segment is 6 minutes.
Okay.
Background, education, experience. The second segment will be. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is African American political participation, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about African American political participation, Reverend RDockery. Reverend Dockery has been with us on a number of occasions, and he's given us quite a bit of information in reference to the mentoring programs of African Americans, the church and African Americans, and et cetera. But today he wishes to talk about the political participation of not only African Americans, but really the political participation of citizens themselves in the political arena. And of course, Reverend Dockery, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you for having us.
And to tell you how delighted we are to have you here with
pleasure.
us.
My pleasure.
Very good. Now, what I'd like to do today, Reverend Dockery, is to get some information in reference to your background,
Okay.
your education, and some of your experiences.
All right.
And then that will end the first 6-minute segment for this program.
Okay.
And then we'll come back with 8 minutes, and we'll talk about the participation of Africans in the political process,
Yes.
perhaps saying something that could encourage
Absolutely.
African Americans and others to get out and participate in the suffrage. But first, let's talk about Reverend RDockery.
All right, sounds great. So I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, attended public schools there, and I came to Nashville 26 years ago. And I, in pursuit of my bachelor's degree, currently have a bachelor's degree with a focus in history from Fisk University. From there, I got my master's degree in education with the focus on leadership supervision from Trevecca Nazarene here in Nashville. And subsequently, we went to Walden University to begin our doctoral studies in K through 12 educational leadership. So we're working real hard to wrap that up, the research and dissertation process for the PhD in educational education, K through 12 leadership.
And so you've been involved in all kinds of activities in Nashville, Tennessee.
absolutely.
And as a matter of fact, I think I indicated earlier that we first met you as a mentor. You had a program dealing with the efforts to mentor young African American men. How did that go?
It's still going. Over the years, I worked as a school teacher. I taught in Metro Public Schools. I worked in the correction facilities. Worked as a supervisor in a youth detention, Woodland Hills Institute here in Nashville. And started my nonprofit back in 1998, and that was building families and communities.
Good.
Missions Incorporated, which we talked about. And from there, we had several initiatives, one of which was the fatherhood development piece, which you were kind enough to join us in a major lecture series back in 2006. We had a parent involvement training piece. We had a piece where we were focused on education and support services and things of that nature. So that's what has kept us busy. That and wife and children and pastoring formerly Mount Sinai Cumberland Presbyterian Church and currently Bethel Family Church. A little small non-denominational body. So that's been keeping us busy.
And now you're concerned about the political process and,
Yes, sir.
and African American participation, of general participation in the political process. And what we do, I think we've got about 2 minutes before we end this segment for today. But let's make some statements in reference to political participation.
So we see the data, and we see today, particularly after the age of President Barack Obama, the first African American president, where there's a huge decline in African American voter participation across the nation. There was this energy that burst back in 07 and 08 that ultimately put them in, and we saw that decline by 2012, where there was this lack of interest. But historically, there's a historical basis for this. I'm convinced, as a student of history, that there are a lot of reasons why not just African Americans, but specifically African Americans, have lost confidence in the electoral process in America. And specifically for the African American experience, the question is, what is the relevance for us? How really do we benefit from it? Many people would argue that it's just a game and it's not worth our time. And I think hence the apathy that we see across the nation, more specifically state of Tennessee, right here in Davidson County.
And so there's no real passion in a real sense on the part of many people dealing with the political process, and there's a lot of apathy, you say.
Yes, sir. I would argue that there once was, but it has been lost.
Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to take our first commercial break, and then we're going to come back, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Et cetera, and et cetera. But see, you got to look at me. You got to pay attention to me. Because if you don't pay attention to me, I mess up the whole thing. I'm the only one in here. You can't mess this show up. I'm the only one in here that can mess this show up. And so, pamper me.
I mean, you got to look at me.
Okay, I'm always looking at you. I got my eye on you. Okay, really. Okay, but.
I give you what I got.
Okay, I know. I can understand that. I certainly understand that. It's not as a criticism, but I just pamper me. You know, said Dr. Haney. If I don't look at Dr. Haney, let Dr. Haney know, he'll just keep on running, and then he'll run out of time and whatever. That's what I tell Reverend Reuben Dockery here. That hey, I'm the only one that can mess this up. Can't nobody else mess it up but me. And if it get messed up, who they look at? And that's cause I mess it up.
It go good, it's on you.
It's on me.
It go bad.
God is good, and you know that.
I think it's getting better all the time.
Oh yeah. Okay, but really, so what we'll do, we'll talk about this political participation. And I want you to go into it, Doctor. You know, and bring in your stuff as much as you possibly can. But you know, don't.
I understand.
You understand. Because African American political participation. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Reverend Dockery in reference to African American political participation. And I would imagine, Dockery, the climate in terms of African American participation. And I think you've already indicated that African Americans come out to vote when they feel that there's a special interest, and I think you talked about President Obama's election and et cetera. That got everybody fired up. But the most important thing I think that all people are trying to point out here is that there's such a very, very small representation of voters when we talk about the political process. And whether you talk about African Americans or the general vote, it's not African Americans, it's the voting of people, period. As a matter of fact, I think somebody said that only 6% of the voting population vote. And that sounds like it's insane to me. Had somebody raised that question, I would have said at least 60 or 70%. But 6%, that's only 6 out of 100 voters? Talk about it.
And it should be alarming. So let's look at this from an historical perspective. It's been about 5 generations now since we've had suffrage rights for African Americans. 1870, actually 1865, when President Lincoln, for his assassination, was pushing for the place of African Americans as free individuals with the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. Frederick Douglass pressed him and said, you cannot set them free without giving them the quintessential right of a citizen, and that's the right to vote. And by 1870, I think it was February, the 15th Amendment was enacted as a part of the Constitution, which gave black men at that time, black women still were not allowed to vote, black men the right to vote. 7 men, black men, Negroes at that time they were called, went to the United States Congress. And they were there until about 1929, I believe it was, when they began to dwindle in terms of African American representation in Congress. And it was a long period of time before you had any more. Interestingly enough, it was the Republican Party that African Americans first embraced in terms of casting their vote. Frederick Douglass became a runner with the Liberty Party of that time, and he was actually ran as on a vice presidential ticket. I say that to say that I think for African Americans then, or Negroes as they were called aptly, the focus was not about a particular love for a particular party, but for the party that was supporting their freedom, their liberation, their opportunity to be a part of the American way of life. And that continued until about 1937, I believe it was, when Roosevelt brought the New Deal on, 35 when he brought the New Deal on. And that appealed to African American voters. And many of them supported him. And subsequently they supported Truman. And he won 47% of the African American vote in 1947, you know. And as it moved forward, African Americans have been a part of the Democratic platform from then to now. Over the years, many of them, certain movements in the 60s and what have you, the Voters' Rights Act, it was supposed to try to do what the 15th Amendment was not doing very well. Right?
Bring black folks out in political participation.
Extend them the opportunity to actually be a viable part of America through the right to vote. Now, a lot of people say, even to me as a minister, why would you be interested in politics? Well, the truth of the matter is, Black's Law Dictionary defines citizenship as being a member of a political community. So if you live in the United States of America and you're a citizen, if you're going to be heard, if you're going to be respected, if you're going to be a part, you must avail your rights as a citizen, and voting is a quintessential right to express that. I don't know, Dr. Haney, that the education and awareness around that is provided very well, particularly for the whole. And I'm not speaking of everybody, but for the whole of African Americans. We're talking about the old and the young. I mentioned 5 generations now, 2015. We still find ourselves questionably left out of the political process by and large. And largely because certain generations did not pass down the essence and the importance of using that, being aware. I think it's important to have voter registration, absolutely. And we saw that during the 60s with SNCC and groups like that. But it's equally important to have voter education and organization, because that's what they had as well. We've lost that. Now, when President Obama came along, of course, riding under the Democratic ticket, great things in the party, African Americans saw my mother, my mother-in-law, my dad, and others in a certain generation, they saw a grand opportunity to put an African American in the White House. And we seized that. That happened. But if we're intellectually honest, there are many people now who voted then who have been disappointed to realize that there's economically in many ways for African Americans, educationally for African Americans, socially, and even politically, nothing has changed. But it wasn't on President Obama alone. If there was appropriate education and organization, specifically on the African American subgroup, I believe we could have sustained that bump greater. And today what we're seeing is this apathy that comes from being disappointed.
And so in a real sense, there has to be much more activity in terms of organizing and educating
Right.
African Americans for political participation, excuse me, regardless of who might be running for an office, which is to say that not to simply go out and vote for anybody,
Right.
but to be aware of participation and
Exactly.
to understand that if you don't participate, then you can't say too much about those individuals who have been elected.
You can, but you won't be taken very seriously. Now, when you speak, now we've seen other subgroups, such as the LGBT group and Hispanic group, they have brought themselves together and established a well-defined agenda. And they put that on the table for political candidates vying for their vote. It's clear where they stand. There's no ambiguity whatsoever about it. If the African American subgroup, who's long been here, and there was a time where it was illegal for a Negro to vote, black man, a colored man, or African American, vote could go to jail and be killed for doing so, teaching them and so forth and so on. In fact, Frederick Douglass was quoted as saying that I didn't know I was a slave until I learned I couldn't do what I wanted to. Which is amazing today. And there are a lot of young people, nobody's physically enslaving them, it's a mental slavery because of a lack of knowledge and
so they need to be educated. There need to be
Absolutely.
more education in reference, more kind of discussions as the discussions that we're having now in reference to dealing with that. And so we're going to take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
That's the 3 and the 0. That's third.
Is that what it is?
That's third. This is 3. That's a single 3 is 3.
That's when you give me 30 seconds. That's 30 seconds, not 3 minutes. Yeah, yeah. So,
We went over that. We just went over that.
yeah, well, we'll have to capture it next time around. How many we got out about 20 seconds too early or what?
I mean, they just added it, but I didn't know if that's what you wanted to do. But
That's what I want you to do, but I didn't.
no, not what I'm doing. What you doing? I'm doing what you asked me to do. You just didn't take my cue that time.
I didn't tell you. Sure didn't. I didn't. I thought you had given me a 3-minute cue earlier.
Yeah.
And yeah. Well, I was still keeping up with that 3 minutes. Yeah. You got to wind. So
That's what I'm saying, when I rap, that's what that means.
that's wrapping it up. Wrapping it up.
You see this, that means you got time. Anytime you see a hand not doing this, that means you got some time.
Time. But I don't know how much time I have.
30. All right, let's go through it.
Oh,
5,
five,
4,
3, 2, 1.
30, rap.
After 30 years.
It's been a while. hasn't it? Well,
Yeah, that's okay. That's I got it.
You good to go?
Yeah, I'm good to go. I'm good to go. And so now we got about 10 minutes for this last segment, right?
And this is the long.
This is the longest segment, okay. And I got out of those about 20 seconds too early. Is that right?
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, 20. Yeah, good. That's good. I Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor RDockery, and he's giving us some information in reference to the political participation of Africans in the political process. And of course, Reverend Dockery, let's see if we can pick up where we left off in terms of African American participation and any other information that you might have in reference to how we might be able to make people much more aware and whatever we might be able to do. Let's see if we might be able to do it from that perspective.
Well, see, so there's this perception. And, you know, people's realities are based on their perception of what's real, their experience. That voting is not for us. Who is us? Black people, African Americans. When Jesse Jackson ran for president in 1984, 85, I believe it was, a lot of people questioned his viability as a candidate and his sincerity and things of that nature. But I think it opened up the perspective or the possibility, the chance, which may in many ways have laid the groundwork for President Obama.
In other words, had not there been a Jesse Jackson, there probably could not have been a Barack Obama.
Quite possibly. I think there's an argument that can be made there. There's room for argument there. But then you have to consider that Shirley Chisholm, back in 1972, many would like to discredit her efforts, but it opened the door to thought to that possibility. The question was how organized and how prepared were the people that would benefit from such a bump to sustain that. And so what we saw from 85 up until about 2007 is there was some gap there. And so with the right marketing and the right pitch, a young, handsome, articulate young man that represent hope not only for African Americans, for many older whites who would like to see America improve and do better. Here he came. There was this misunderstanding, though, this displaced thinking that he could do it all by himself at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
You know, Reverend Dockery, let's also look at this from another perspective too.
Okay.
When we think in terms of what the various state legislatures are doing throughout the nation in terms of trying to minimize the participation of African American voters, and et cetera, and et cetera. Now, it seems to me that since this is going on, and I think this is well known. I mean, everybody will talk about this. But it seems to me that if this is what is happening, that ought to be an extra encouragement or incentive for those individuals who have not registered. If you know that somebody is trying to intentionally keep you from participating in the political process, it seems to me that that would be the greatest of encouragement to send you out to register to vote, to know that the state legislature and members of the various parties and et cetera are trying to pass legislation that will keep you at home, period.
That's a great point you're making.
Then why does not that?
Right, so that's a great point you're making. So again, if you understood that the legislature is appointed by the people through the electoral process, not only on the state level, but on the local level as well. You have to, those people have to be voted in. And if you're not at the polls, your voice is not represented. In fact, your place as a citizen has been overlooked. Some of it you can argue is somebody else's fault, but I would argue that most of it is your fault. But not knowing does not excuse the reality that certain things are going to exist and take place. A lot of times when decisions are made because we're in the wrong, we are talking about African American people by and large, in the wrong place, those decisions go and they're made without our input. So what we have to do as religious organizations, the church has historically been the place that African Americans have looked to for that guidance. I think there's some room to improve on that, to go back and bring that back, you know, particularly for young people. 18 years old was between 18 and 25, that was the average age of voters that really represented that 97% African American vote for President Obama. Right?
18 to 25,
18 to 25.
very, very young participation.
And interestingly enough, when you look at the polling data, that's where the dip is.
And it's young people for the most part who are no longer
Who's tapped out.
who stopped participating.
Yes, sir.
And
Yes,
that,
sir.
not only is that true in reference to this election, but it's true in reference to many of the elections prior
That's right. That's right.
to President Obama. And
We have an election here in Davidson County coming up on August the 6th. The question is, and it's expected that 6% that national projection, it's expected that that's going to hold true again. So you're going to be looking at a new mayor and practically new council. What is it that you need to know? You need to search the candidates out, look at their websites, go to forums and set up forums if there are none, and insist that they answer your questions for you. If they take the notion that you're not, I don't need to be there and I don't want to be there or I can't be there, what they're telling you is what they would do if they got in office, and that is to overlook your interests.
And so Africans and all those other individuals who might wish to see a different political arena
Sure.
might be able to affect that if they got out and
Absolutely.
participated in the political
And let me
process.
say this, Doc, briefly. It's important to understand that we're always going to be the minority population, unless some huge change. But and this is the lesson that the Hispanics learn. It's okay if the dominant group controls 90% of the agenda politically. But as long as my 10% is representative of 100% of what I need, I'll do all right. And that's where we fall short. We're not organized, we're not educated to the point where we identify educationally, socially, politically, what it is that we need and what it is that we demand from the government that represents us. We're a republic form of government, which means it's government by the people, for the people, and no other way.
Well, do you think that it might be in the best interest of politicians to educate their voters? Because if you want somebody to come out and participate and vote for you,
unless you're expecting certain people to vote and certain people not to vote. And that's how oftentimes politicians skew numbers. Okay? So you have to really ask yourself about, I think it's important for you to look for not a politician, but an advocate for the people. An advocate for the people has only one thing in common with a politician. They're looking for the numbers. But the advocate is looking to serve the numbers, whereas the politician is looking to get numbers to serve their own interests. And I would think that anyone running should take that mantra on, that I'm not there to serve my own political interests, as opposed to serving the interests of the people.
now, and so the election that is fast approaching,
Yes, sir.
it will be in August.
That's correct.
Is that the
general election
That's the general election
for Davidson
for
County.
mayors, for council,
That's correct.
and everybody else.
That's correct. Vice mayor, council at large, and the mayor's race.
And so if a person wishes to participate in this election, they have to be registered in
That's
order to
correct.
vote.
That's
See,
right.
it's one thing to talk about people voting.
That's right.
And people might want to vote when it comes time to vote.
Right. So here's some important dates. July the 7th is the last date you can register if you're not. If you're inactive, it's the last date you can become active again. So you need to do that right away. Go to the election commission, Davis County Election Commission, and there's a tab you can check to see if you're actually in order. If you move from your address within the last 6 months or so, you need to update your address and things of those natures. You need to make sure that you're eligible to vote, though, before July the 7th. July 17th, early voting starts. So you can go to Howard Office Building from that point until the 22nd, I believe it is, and early vote only there. Then 11 other sites open up based on where your councilmatic district is, and you'll be able to vote for your council person, 5 people council at large, and for the vice mayor and for the mayor in the mayor's race.
And so all of the instruction has already been given in
Yes,
terms
sir.
of what you have to do.
Right.
And now the only thing that is important is that each individual
Take advantage
can
of it.
recognize that if he or she is old enough,
That's right. 18.
18 years of
Or
age,
will be turning 18 by the
time.
time of election.
and all they have to do is to make sure that they are registered to vote.
Correct. And bring your ID. A valid ID would be a driver's license. And I think they took out the student ID thing, but if you don't have a driver's license and you can't afford it, I
Okay.
can't see why that is, but if you can't, you can go and get
Okay,
one.
and of course, let me thank you, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.
hanging on what you want to do and what you're going to do and what the Lord is giving you to do, and just let it flow, man. I can't tell you nothing. I can't tell you nothing. I'm sitting and gleaning. Let me sit up before I go to sleep. Yes, sir. Do like Dr. Haney, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Is that good enough? Good. Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'm Pastor Kelvin L. Walker. I think still have.
Williams, Pastor Marcus Campbell. You got one.
I'm Minister Williams, Reggie Williams.
A little bit more for me.
A little more. We're here talking about how we can restore the youth in our community.
You good?
Pastor Marcus Campbell here to talk about how to restore the youth. Mine messed up, man. Thank you. Here to talk about how to restore the youth and giving them a different mindset of what they've been taught.
It's on.
Okay, Pastor K. Walker, Reverend Campbell, and Reverend Williams. Is that right? That's about as far as I can go with that now. Yes, sir. So this is, I certainly appreciate, Reverend, you bringing all these individuals by here to talk about reclaiming and youth and empowering. Yeah, people need, very good. Yes, okay, this is the first segment will be 6 minutes, okay? And what we'll do, we'll get background, education, that kind of information. I'll start with Reverend Walker here, and he'll give me some statements in reference to who he is, and Brother Campbell, you'll do the same, and Brother Williams, Reverend Williams, Williams, right? You'll do the same. And I see both of you are members of the same gang, GANG, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And of course, I know you'll talk about that. And so what we're going to talk about is how to reclaim African American youth through interactive ministry. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. And reclaim and empower, African American youth through interactive ministry. Yeah. Now, you're going to explain to us what interactive ministry is and how that's interpreted. Okay. And I think we've got the making of a good show here. And we'll start off as soon as we get ready. We'll start off, and you watch me. You said, pamper me now. You got it. I was telling him, I'm the only person that can mess up this show. Can't nobody else mess up this show. So everybody all pay attention to me. Watch me. Help Dr. Haney along, because if you don't help him, then you can't do well. You see, so reclaiming. I know I hit this title on several different aspects, but whatever aspect I talk about, that's
We'll pick up on it.
Pick up on it. He said,
Just throw the ball
don't look at me and be shocked.
Just throw the ball out there.
That's right.
One of
So
us will
that's
catch it.
Yeah, so that's right. Yeah, we got, as I often say, I'm the only person that can mess this up. Can't nobody else mess this up. And I'm determined not to mess it up this time.